For myself, I've always learned that, be curious, kind of explore, experiment. It's funny because it's always come natural to me to work within technology. Even though you look at my work, you might think it's incredibly analog, but behind all of that, I've been using technology. So I've always been using it as an aid. So something I've learned is embrace technology as an aid. Make sure that you're controlling it, it's not controlling you, And so I think ultimately, to keep it short and sweet, that's something I've learned.
So today we're having a conversation with world-renowned artist Shantell Martin. So Shantell, great to see you once again.
It's always good to see you.
How things going up there on the West Coast now? You abandoned us. You abandoned the East Coast.
I abandoned New York for LA. I don't know how long for. I feel like there was false advertising. Everyone told me that they have lovely winters here and it's sunny all the time. It's not true. It gets really cold. There's a lot of rain. And I live right out kind of towards the beach. So it's cold most of the time and grey. May grey, June gloom.
It's still warmer than it is out here. So you get the sun, and the sunsets in California are fantastic. So
that's true. That is true.
Yeah, not that. So it's a little bit of natural therapy every day. So let's jump into it here. So, obviously, in my new role, standing up AI, there's a lot of conversations to be had around how this is going to impact society, business, culture, and specifically artists. So I really wanted to make sure that we have this conversation so that we can pull in your perspective and the perspective of different creators, because, a lot of these tools this time around are aimed directly at a new era of creative development. So I'm excited to have you on. So let's just talk about your background. So how's your background shaped your art, and what role has technology played in this process?
Yeah, so, that's a very big question, and, there's lots of ways that I could answer it. So I try and kind of just give more of a higher view. But, I'm a kid from London. I grew up, just like a lot of us, kind of in the early 80s, playing Nintendo, Atari, when games were very simple and had a controller with one button. And, for me, I was always curious, like, how those things work. So I would always, I'd get a screwdriver and take apart my Nintendo NES and put it all back together and then play it. And there was something really fun about that idea of what's under the hood. What are we not seeing, and how all these components kind of fit together. So that was something that I was really interested in. And, that kind of many years on, I feel like led me to incorporate technology into the different types of careers that I've had. So, for example, I moved to Japan. We're speaking about technology. You move to somewhere like Japan and Tokyo, technology and visuals are a part of your life everywhere. So in Japan, I became a VJ, a visual jockey, and I started to, in clubs and in venues, create live, drawn, digital and analog visuals. And through that kind of iteration of my career, I was using mixers, DVD tapes, all sorts of VJing software. I was alpha testing, beta testing a lot of the earlier VJ software that was out at the time, and also collaborating with people in Japan that coded, did live code, did circuit bending, where they take apart toys or instruments and kind of reconfigure them to make new sounds and noises. So that earlier stage of my career, I was totally embedded in Tokyo, in this space where technology was all around me. People who were curious about technology were, coding and circuit bending and this type of thing. And then since then, I've been also testing, I think my whole kind of professional life, I've given feedback on software or hardware. It's something that I really like to do. I like to test something and give feedback on it. I think I'm kind of good in the way that I use something. And those roles have also expanded in the positions and time that I've spent at MIT Media Lab, at ITP, NYU, and also the Brown Institute of Media Innovation at Columbia University. So in those kind of academic spaces, I've also, collaborated and touched on technology. And I know that's kind of not really going into any like specific detail, but that's kind of a higher view of being a curious kid, exploring technology, being in Japan, immersed in it, and then coming to America and being kind of in these academic settings where I'm surrounded by people who code, who do social computing, etc.
So in a sense, you feel that your work kind of intersects with technology, always has intersected with technology, and it's inspired you over the years as well.
Yeah, and I'm someone that draws, and if you think about a drawing is a line from A to B. That's kind of a point, and fundamentally that's the basis of code. So actually drawing and code and technology from the basic standpoints really kind of work symmoniously together. They work really well together. And just a curiosity that I've always had with technology. My work, you might just look at it and say, well, you're just drawing and it's black and white lines. But I've actually done a lot of projects where I've looked kind of under the hood of my drawing. So for example, when I was at the Media Lab, I started to look at like the length of lines. And I have a mural in the Media Lab that's been there for quite a few years now. And I know that the length of that combined amount of line in that drawing is 1,664 feet long. I know what the percentage of white space to black space is. All these kind of analytical data of what's actually behind the drawing, I've been curious about that, the XY data, the speeds, the velocity of your drawing. So someone might look at my drawing and say, oh, it's just a drawing on a page. But when I look at it, I see the XY data, I see the velocities, I see the angle. I know typically what the length of line is, and I know what the average coverage of space is. So there's this kind of like curiosity behind the drawing that's being created.
Interesting. So it's like the science behind it. Again, right.
Yeah, and I think, I've never really known what to do with that information, but it's always been important for me to be curious about that and understand that. At the same time, I've had collaborators mostly in New York that I've been collaborating with for 15 years now. And we meet up and, every few years we make a cool project that is a combination of code and drawing. And we just do it for fun. We don't show anyone. Sometimes we end up doing maybe more public-facing projects. But the idea is that I'm curious about technology and code, and people see that connection with my drawing as a way to express their own abilities with code and technology. And so I have these serial collaborators who are, very well established in these technological fields. And we've just been collaborators for like 10, 15 years just for fun.
So that's a good question. So in what ways do your collaborations with the high-profile brands or just with friends who you're working with, and one day we'll collaborate on my sketches, my doodles, and different artists, how do they relate to or expand on your artistic practice and your interests in general? Like, so how do you bring all of those pieces together? Because it's a lot that you're kind of like balancing and merging and fusing, say at the same time.
It's interesting being an artist. I think different artists have different approaches in how they pursue their career or kind of explore the things that they're curious about. My practice is, I see my work as a whole body of work. So along my career, I'm trying to explore things that I'm curious about, collaborate with people I respect and admire, and in addition, I'm also curious about their skills. Work with people that work with people and brands who allow me to take my work and my message and my curiosity to a different demographic, perhaps to mediums that I'm not able to do and execute myself. And also in general, kind of increase the scale of the type of projects I'm working on. So, I think that's kind of the power and the magic of collaborations with institutions, with brands, with other individuals, is that you do get to magnify your own message. You get to explore different mediums and industries. You get to expose the work to different demographics. And you also get to challenge yourself in a different way.
So how do you manage this new era for you, where it's the new world of physical and digital, and what direction are you leaning in more?
Yeah, it's funny because when I first went to St. Martin's, I first went to art school in 1999. And so, 1999, we're getting the first kind of Apple bubble computers in school. We're using kind of the first edition of Photoshop. And, I studied graphic design at St. Martin. So, we were some of the first kids in a way to start messing around with those computers and with like the CS suites. And so I think from the beginning there has been this, for me, the initial caution in using technology or those computers that we got in school, because I just wanted to do things practically and tangibly because I felt like it had more of a connection to me in that way. But they've always kind of been there in the background. But I think ultimately, these tools have always been around, especially within my career. There's always been an advancement that enhances or speeds up the way that a craftsman or woman is able to create something. And, for my work, if I look at my work, my whole career started digitally. As a VJ in Japan, I had 5 years of experience creating work digitally. That's why that part of my career doesn't really exist, because I would show up in the club, I'd plug in my computer to like a V4 mixer with like a little S cable, and then that would be projected. And then at the end of the show, I unplug my computer, unplug the mixer, and then I'd go home. I didn't capture those shows, but the whole experience that I was creating was a digital experience, using the very simple software or computer that I had at that time. And, so for me, if I look at technologies and digital work, it's been the foundation of my career as an artist. It was only then when I moved to New York in 2008, 2009, people were like, what's VJing? What's a projector? We don't know what to do with that. And that's when, for me, I almost de-evolved in a way after spending 5 years in Japan, being really immersed in technology, being really immersed in a culture that has this visual expectation to have visuals and be immersed in technology everywhere. Then I moved to New York and people didn't even know what a projector was. And they were more concerned with table service versus creating a visual experience in a space. And so I think because of that, you could say I had a few years of de-evolving. I started to pick up pens and draw more and draw at a larger scale because of that initial hurdle. But at the same time, I still did have this curiosity in code and how things were made and, kind of how people could manipulate different technologies and create their own from them.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you talk a lot about kind of like how technology influenced and shaped your past and has a role in your present, right? So when we look at where we are now, how do you see the role of artificial intelligence and the evolution of design and creativity based on your experiences and observation? Like what does that look like now and for the future?
Yeah, it's also a very big question. And I think, if we look at where we are now specifically, we have this friction or this conflict or this hesitation with AI. But, just like with any introduction to any new tool, there's kind of like two sides to that coin. And just like any new tool, it really comes down to the intention of the people creating it and using it. So, for example, in when Facebook and all of those new platforms were coming out, there was definitely a hesitation for people to use it, but there was a benefit that it could connect us all together. If you were in different countries, different cities, you've kind of moved on from the school that you grew up, there was this chance to reconnect with everyone. But the intention of that company was actually also, in addition, to collect all of your data so that they could sell that and, at that time, not give you a reason to opt in or to opt out or to kind of really expose what was going on under the hood. And so I think with any new kind of technological leap comes the responsibility of how and why we're using it and what we're being told and what we're not being told. So the transparency of like the data and the ownership that's being collected. I think that it also, in addition to that, has the ability to enhance specific industries. So for example, like architecture, we have been buildings for a very long time as civilizations. In the last kind of few decades, 60s, 70s, we've started to build like skyscrapers, larger buildings, even larger buildings. We know what it takes to create buildings that are harmonious, that amplify and encourage healthy living with regards to like this type of space, the light, the floor plans, etc. But we have architects who want to build, or I should say companies that employ architects perhaps, to create the cheapest, easiest infrastructures that are not creative, that are not harmonious, that do not encourage healthy living. And that is irresponsible. But that is like, just if you go to any city in America and you look at the architecture, a lot of that landscape is irresponsible. And they're creating buildings that do not lead us to live like happy or encourage us to have happier, healthy lives based on where we're living and where we're working, or even the hospitals that we walk into. And so, perhaps with AI, you could, based on all of that data and all of, you could train it on all this data and say, based on all of this, create happier, healthier buildings that, are more sustainable, that encourage more light, that incorporate more, life and plant life, and that, if it's a hospital or a school, that really foster inspiration and education and health. What does that look like? So I think, there are potential ways of having large data sets that we can perhaps put that intention behind it to say, let's create something better. That said, you do have other industries where, like right now we're at the end of February and there's all these layoffs in media right now. All these big kind of media companies are laying off 75% of their staff, 85% of their staff. And that's probably because they're incorporating AI. People are looking at bottom lines, return of investment. They're looking for shortcuts. They're not thinking of the bigger picture. And, that puts a lot of people kind of out there in the space and in the market. So that's kind of a long way of saying, I think with AI, they're ultimately, it's about the intention of the people using it, how transparent we're making, how transparent we're enabling people to be, or not transparent. And, that there is a chance to use it for good or bad, just like any tool that's out there.
Indeed. And so you had kind of like an unwelcome experience around working with an organization, which we shall not name, around artificial intelligence and application. You want to tell us a story around that?
Yeah, so, as I said earlier, I've always been an artist that's always curious about technology. I'm curious about the work or the information that's under the hood of my art creatively. And so back in 2013, 14, I was curious about AI and training large data sets of my work to see if ultimately, if you gave me an initial line, like a starting point, which I call the DNA for my drawing, if you gave me a blank DNA and I was to fill that in at random times over a course of a year or 2 years or 10 years, would I always input the same kind of characters and words and landscapes? So I kind of had this initial idea. So yeah, back in kind of around 2014, I had some collaborators at an institution where we trained a large data set of my work, and then gave the the model kind of new DNAs to see then what it would create. What then happened is that my collaborators then started to create new drawings of mine and then kind of give them away. And I'm like, wait, what are you doing? And they're like, well, now we own the output. I was like, what do you mean you own the output? And they're like, well, we took your drawings, we trained the model, and because we trained that model, we now own the output. And I was like, no, that doesn't work. The output is a derivative of the input. They then went and got a couple of lawyers from a very established, law clinic that, lots of people would be aware of. And they tried to come after me to set precedent and claim that the ownership of the IP was theirs versus mine. And, this is 2014, 15, where we don't really have any precedent set on the ownership of AI or kind of that IP with regards to the artist or the model that's been trained. And,
because then it's still all new at that point, new, super experiment.
And, and that's the thing is like, and we're still having this issue today, but back in 2014, 15, it wasn't very clear what AI could do or couldn't do. It was almost like, it couldn't do that much. It was very limited at the time. But if you told an eloquent enough story, you could convince someone that it was doing something magical and creative and, inventing something new that the artist couldn't ever do, so therefore you own it. So if you told the story well enough, perhaps you could convince someone that didn't really know that the output was simply a derivative of the input. And so, that was a thing where, in a way, I felt like I was being used as a guinea pig by these lawyers and collaborators to set a precedent in AI. That caused me to then not touch AI for the last 10 years, because without any clear ownership of the, who owns what, like, I don't really want to touch it, unless it's my own platform that I'm creating, which is something that I'm working on right now, is creating my own platform that, is trained on my own data set that can, create new drawings based on certain parameters. So I feel like if I'm still cautious in using AI, generative technology, and technologically I'm quite enabled and have, been in this space kind of behind the scenes for a long time. If I feel quite cautious about using it, then think about how all these other artists must think that perhaps haven't touched it or had as much experience. But yeah, so that was a very unfortunate kind of experience that I had to go through.
But it seems like it hasn't, it pushed you away from for a little while because understandably you're probably a bit gun shy and a bit suspect of it. But now it looks like you're embracing it a bit more via your own platform. So can you talk to us about what that looks like and tell us, and definitely tell us when it's going to launch? That'll be very cool to play around with.
Yes. So I think, there are, as I said earlier, I think these tools can be used for good. I think especially within the creative space, within artists, architects, designers, I think it can amplify, it can speed up, it can facilitate kind of a lot of growth within that person's career, and in a way just be an extra tool, just like Photoshop was when Photoshop was introduced. So if I'm going to use such a tool, I want to be very clear on the parameters of like the ownership and kind of what that data is being used for. And the only way I can really truly understand that if I'm creating my own program. So I look at kind of back at artists like Solowit or Lawrence Weiner, artists that work with instructional based work. With Solowit's work, he had these instructions, and based on these instructions and the dimensions of the canvas or the surface that the work was going to be executed in, those prompts or instructions would lead to, kind of a new work or a derivative of an original work. And so, the platform that I'm working on essentially, goes through a body of work. So it can go through an artist's body of work, be it 100 pieces, be it 2,000 pieces, depending on how long you've been working and how much you've created, to extract the motifs or the recurring characters, phrases, words, objects, colors from that, and in a way create like a catalog. So there's like a catalog or an index of all of that. And then, for example, for mine, you might say, hey, create a drawing on, a wall that is 5 foot by 10 foot, include a positive phrase, 5 faces, and a landscape. And then it kind of goes through the index, and it will recompose a drawing for that space. And maybe at some point you even choose the line width or, the density, etc. There might be some other parameters that you can play with there, for example. And so, for me, this is something I actually have wanted to make for like the last few years, but the terminology or the verbiage that we use has changed. 5-10 years ago, I'm like, I want to create an algorithm that, understands my archive and my body of work, and that algorithm then creates new works. And, so now we can talk about kind of large language models, or we can talk about prompts, or we can talk about, kind of other things, because the technology for me is catching up with that idea that I've had many years ago, which is enabling me to then build this for myself and then build it for others. So, right now I'm in the stage of creating an MVP, kind of working out that workflow, speaking to engineers to, kind of create that demo, that baseline. And then I'll be looking for investment to kind of like get this off and running and, kind of test it. And I think it's kind of a platform that then perhaps will have other features where it could be embedded into other platforms or companies that are out there already today that perhaps want to work with design and artist. And, we can license these packages or these catalogs in a way to different types of projects.
All right, so that's interesting. So previously you did a collaboration with Kendrick Lamar, right? So now we were just talking about how AI and how you can play a role in terms of experimenting with AI as a visual artist. And there's a lot of conversation around what does that mean for performance artists. Someone like Kendrick Lamar, Grimes has done some interesting things around it as well. But what are your thoughts on being able to license your voice as a musician, as a singer, as a rapper, performer, so that the platform and a wider base of folks can actually create whole new works of art, of course, with attribution and remuneration, because I think it only makes sense and it's fair, but it's pushing us towards a certain level of creativity that we've never seen before. What are your thoughts around those?
You mentioned kind of attribution. I think these things just become an extra tool, and then an artist can opt in to use it or opt out to use it. The caution or hesitation I have with these things comes back to, a thing that we've just spoken about a few times, is how transparent and clear are the legal kind of parameters of this, of who owns what it can be used for or not used for. Another project I'm looking at right now is going through artists' last wills and testaments of, kind of artists that are no longer with us, or artists that have last wills and testaments that are kind of older, and then can kind of comparing those last wills and testaments with like the work that's actually out there in the world. And, often you can see like, a conflict in the artist's body of work that they created before they passed, and then, what the estate or the family or the foundation has then put out, for the sake of money at the end. So it comes down to the intention of, what these platforms are using it for. It comes down to how transparent and clear those contracts are. Because, if we look at any of the industries, the music industry, the art industry, any industry that relies on a creative input, those creatives aren't typically the ones that come out with the greater benefit. So it also depends on who are structuring those contracts, how transparent those contracts are, what language that small print is. Because if we want to extrapolate that and have that to a wider audience, someone like Kendrick might have a big legal team and they can go through it line by line by line by line, and they can advocate for changes in that agreement. A smaller artist, for example, perhaps might not even have a legal team. They might not even have a legal advisor. They might not understand the small print. They might not be reading that, and they might give away something that they should not be giving away. So I think a lot of these things is understanding the intentions of the use of licensing your voice or your artwork. It comes down to the terms that these licenses are. For example, people come to me with a project, and it might be a brand or an institution that I really am excited to work with, and then they send me a contract that says that they can use whatever I make for perpetuity in any likeness, known or unknown to man, essentially forever and forever and forever. For me, that is morally and ethically wrong. And people might laugh at that, but go look at the contracts that you're giving to an artist. Go look at a contract that you just gave to a musician and tell me if it doesn't say perpetuity in there. And
a lot of I've seen them. They're all agreed. They're all just...
Yeah, and they'll just say, well, it's just a standard contract. So a standard contract, you in that job that you're in, that you might be working in for 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years, you're trying to make me sign something that my great-great-great-great-great-children could be accountable for, So it's, I think a lot of that stuff, it just comes down to the ethics and morals of the terminology and the verbiage that we're putting into contracts. It comes down to how clear and transparent, like the legal side of things. And also you mentioned attribution. It's funny because before AI was a big thing, in the photography world, and the visual world, we had Creative Commons license. So we could attribute with commercial use, without commercial use, with attribution, etc. And for some reason in the AI space, we forgot all about the Creative Commons license, or how to attribute, or how to give permission to opt in or opt out for commercial use. And I think, with a lot of the AI stuff, for example, why are we not attributing? Why are we not having some sort of Creative Commons license where there's a page or a document that links to it, and it just lists every place and every space that you got a fraction of this image from, you got a fraction of that image from, you got a fraction of that image from, so that those creators, original people, can get some attribution, or they could have opted in or out for that commercial use.
Right, because the technology is here for us to track and deliver transparency around attribution and usage and remuneration. We just have to make sure that the right people are getting taken care of.
And that's the thing. The people who are building the platforms are not speaking to the creatives or the artists or the architects or the designers. So therefore, they're not even considering that they might need attribution. And that's the thing. I think whenever we're building these new platforms and spaces, it's so important to pull in creative voices at that time to say, hey, what are we missing? What do we need here? Because these platforms are being created by engineers who are not creatively out in the space, nor do they have work or their voice or their visuals out in the space. So there's so much that is missed when it comes down to just the smaller ideas of connecting us and being transparent and having that accountability.
So when you look at all this, how do you think artificial intelligence might impact the relationship between artists and their audience and the creative process itself? Now that it is here, it's going to have an impact on everything. So how's it going to affect my relationship with you, yours with mine, and yours with your broader, wider audience?
It depends. It's funny now. You can tell. You get some emails and you're like, AI wrote this. Like someone just put this into chat and then kind of sent me this email. So don't do that. Like we have an internal kind of compass that is letting us know if something has been filtered through AI. And I think that's the thing. Like we can use these things to aid, to help facilitate, to make things more efficient, to speed up. But ultimately, at the end of it, I think we all have an inbuilt internal compass where we can tell if things are real or not. So I think especially from artists, maybe the administrative side, this could help speed things up. It could be an aid. From the visual side, I think it can, as Photoshop has been, it can be a tool which helps to facilitate, which it helps to streamline, it helps to brainstorm. But essentially, from the creative artistic standpoint, we're still going to want to put our own fingerprint and essence into the work, because we can tell as viewers and the audience if it's real or not.
What are some of the key lessons or insights that you've gained from your experience working at this intersection of art, technology, and design?
For myself, I've always learned that, be curious, kind of explore, experiment. It's funny because it's always come natural to me to work within technology. Even though you look at my work, you might think it's incredibly analog, but behind all of that, I've been using technology. So I've always been using it as an aid. So something I've learned is embrace technology as an aid. Make sure that you're controlling it, it's not controlling you, And so I think ultimately, to keep it short and sweet, that's something I've learned.
Can you give us the name of the platform that you're going to be launching with generative AI that's going to be Shantell AI or Shantell in a box?
So essentially I want to call it felt, as in a felt board. So I don't know if you remember the felt boards when you were a kid. And so this is a working title. The name may change, but essentially the process is almost like a felt board kit. So when you're a kid, you have that box of all these shapes and objects that have already cut out, and then you have a felt board, and then you can configure and reconfigure those shapes on that felt board in any way that you want. And there's almost like an infinite amount of kind of reconfigurations that you can make. So that's kind of the process. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Is there anything that you're working on now or that's going to be launching in the next few months that you can talk about? Because I know you have a lot of fans, so I'm sure everyone's going to be like, what's the new thing? What's the next thing? So what can you sneak peek right here?
So sneak peek is that, I'm in LA right now. I have a gallery show that opens on February 29th that runs through April 17th. So if you find yourself in LA, then I'm coming to New York to draw a mural in the lobby of the W Hotel in Union Square. So, they've just put a lot of funding in to completely revamp that whole hotel. So you're going to walk into this beautiful lobby and be kind of immersed with these two big drawings that I'm going to be doing. And then later on,
what's the date on that again?
End of March, spring, let's go to the W Hotel. Let's have a little celebration there. And then later in the year, I'm excited for a new kind of product collaboration with Brompton Bicycles, one of the oldest fold-in bike companies in the world. And so there's going to be a Shantell Brompton bike that comes out. So, you'll be able to get around, get from your work to your job and everything, in style. So yeah, keep an eye out for that in the summer. I've started to work on my own podcast series, something I've also wanted to do for many years, but it's called What's the Point? So every so often, I have these existential crises of like, what is the point in being an artist? I make stuff, and then someday I'm not going to be here. It sounds pretty harsh, but that's the reality of it. And so I freak out every now and then about that. And in the past, I've called an artist friend and said, hey, like, why do you make art? Like, why do you do this? Being an artist isn't the easiest career path, especially if you don't come from certain kind of privileges. It's a struggle. And so I ask other artists like why they make what they make. And in the past, this has really comforted me and re-inspired me. And so I am starting a podcast called What's the Point? I've recorded 6 episodes already so far. They've been really insightful and really inspiring. And, that's something I'm really excited to put out there in the world and kind of have it grow and, eventually reach out to other people outside of artists, curators, historians, etc.
And then finally, so what excites you most about the future of design and creativity in this new era of AI? And what do you hope to see unfold in the coming years?
Yeah, I think personally, I'm excited about having the ability to cross off some of these projects that I've been wanting to do for the last 20 years that I've been limited to do because of the technology or the infrastructure that I haven't had access to. So personally, I'm excited about that. On a global perspective, I'm excited for things to, kind of get through this big hump of how terrified everyone is, and hopefully that I'm excited to see if we can adopt it in a responsible, transparent way where we can all do some good from this versus more harm from this.
Once again, thank you so much for the time and for coming on the show. It's great to have these conversations with you, and just always good to just catch up. So looking forward to it. And so I will absolutely see you in New York at the W reopening. And if I get out to LA before then, I will make sure that we link up for dinner.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you so much, Donovan.